Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Gwent, and today we're going to be playing the new Double Down seasonal event, which is an alternate game mode in which every card in our deck gets duplicated, and then whenever we play a unit, we will also play a random unit from our deck with the same provision cost. That means we can play 2 copies of some of the strongest cards in the game, so we can play some pretty awesome combos. Last time we used that to score over 1,000 points, but this time, we're going to focus on the damage. So let's go take a look at the deck. So today we'll be playing a Skellige Ursine ritual deck, which lets us damage some of our units, which is actually helpful for some of our cards. But the focus of this deck is to use cards like Fulmar and Melusine, along with Wild Boar of the Sea, to deal tons of damage to our opponent. And if we have Dagur Two Blades on the board when we do that, he will get boosted like crazy. So that's the general idea, but now I'll flip through the deck to show you what else we have. And so Fulmar will give us the ability to cause rain and then convert that rain into storm, allowing us to damage all of the units on our opponent's rows. Also, Fulmar is our only 12 provision cost unit, which means that when we play him, we are guaranteed to play our other Fulmar from our deck. And then Wild Boar of the Sea is likely to be our finisher. Once there are all those damage units out there, we'll play this last to dish out even more damage. And Wild Boar of the Sea is our only 11 provision cost unit in our deck, which means when we play one Wild Boar of the Sea, we are guaranteed to get the other one out of our deck as well. Then we have Melusine, who is another great source of damage because she can also spawn in rain. So this is another way to load up on a bunch of weather effects and then convert those weather effects into storm using Fulmar. And Melusine will be one of our primary point scorers on our side as well, especially if we can put Cultists next to her. That includes either Fulmar or several cards that we'll talk about later on. Next we have Dagur, which, like we were saying, gets boosted like crazy as long as we have that damage, which means that if we play one of them, we don't know if we're going to get either Melusine or Dagur out from our deck. Now that's not the end of the world because we're generally going to want to play those cards in the same round, but it is something that you should bear in mind just in case. Then Dire Bear is an interesting one because Melusine does not get boosted, she only gets her base power increase. So Dagur is really our only card that's getting boosted, and that means Dire Bear has very little chance of backfiring on us and has a lot of opportunity to prevent our opponents from boosting themselves. So it is certainly somewhat matchup dependent. If you're going against an opponent that is doing a lot of boosting, then it could be a great way to shut them down. But if you aren't, then it's not as effective. It is also our only 9 provision cost card, which means if we play this, we will be guaranteed to get our other Dire Bear out of our deck, in which case we can play one of them in each row, preventing our opponent from doing any boosting at all. And so this is sort of a high-risk, high-reward approach, and if you're not a big fan of that, you can swap out Dire Bear, and instead use Covenant of Steel, the Skellige Defender, to give yourself a better way of protecting either Dagur or the Melusines. So I have not included Covenant of Steel in this deck, but if you do prefer to have this card, then I recommend that you swap it in to replace Dire Bear. Next, we have Vildkaarl, which is another cultist, so another good card to play next to Melusine, especially because Melusine will deal damage to adjacent units, which helps us transform the Vildkaarl into the Champion of Svalbard, which is a 12-power unit, and this is our only 8 provision cost card, which means that when we play one of the Vildkaarls, we'll get the other one out of our deck, which makes it really easy for us to play a Vildkaarl on one side of Melusine and another Vildkaarl on the other side of Melusine. But if for whatever reason you can't play the Vildkaarl in the same round as Melusine, this is a good unit to target with your leader ability. Then we have Blueboy, who is the only 7 provision cost card, so we'll get the other Blueboy out of our deck when we play him, and he's another target for our leader ability to deal damage to our opponent. Then Restore is a way to heal and boost whatever unit we choose to damage with our leader ability, and if you've already used all of your leader ability charges when you have Restore, then another good target for this is Melusine, because Melusine will damage herself, but increase her base power, so Restore should also work well on her. Then, because we're doing a fair bit of self-damaging, the Heymaey Flaminica is a good way to heal off that damage. Then our other 6 provision cost unit is the Craite Greatsword, which will get healed whenever we damage opposing units, and we have a lot of damage. But if for whatever reason we don't have damage in the round in which we're playing the Greatsword, then we can play it in the same row as the Flaminicas, in which case those will heal our Greatswords. And because they both cost 6 provisions, it means that oftentimes we'll play a Greatsword and we'll also get a Flaminica, which makes for a nice combo. Then we have the Drummond Shield Maiden, which is another target of our leader ability because if we play one of them and we use a leader ability charge to damage it, then we will immediately get all of them out from our deck, giving us a fair number of points and a lot of deck thinning, which is especially helpful because we have several units that cost 5 provisions, so it is the most difficult to predict which card we're going to get out of our deck when we're playing a 5 provision cost unit. But getting all the Shield Maidens out of our deck makes that a little bit easier for us to predict. Then we have the Bear Witcher Mentor, which is ideally a finisher. When we have a lot of damage units out there, it will get a big boost. Then the Melusine Cultist is another card that we can play next to our Melusine, because as a cultist, it will reset her order, and it's also another source of generating rain on our opponent's side. Speaking of rain, just in case we completely run out of ways to make it happen, we also have a Torrential Rain, but ideally we'd have enough sources of providing rain that we don't need to use this, so probably something we'd prefer to keep in our deck and leave unused. And then, similar with the Megascope, we could use it to create copies of, say, a Greatsword, because that does have 10 base power, but because it's an artifact, it means that we aren't going to play a second copy of that card out from our deck, and so it's probably not as good, and therefore a card we'd also prefer to keep in our deck and leave unused. Then the Hermit is another cultist, and therefore another card that is decent to play next to Melusine, and another card that damages itself, so that means it works well with the Flaminica, and because it's healing itself rather than boosting itself, it means that it still works even when it's in the same row as a Dire Bear. Speaking of bears, now we have the Savage Bear, which because we'll have additional copies of it, means that if we play some of them in round 1 and get a bunch of them in our graveyard, then the Savage Bears that we play in round 2 or round 3 will have that many more charges, making them deal even more damage, giving us solid value for just a 4 provision cost unit. So there's a look at the deck, and like I said, the theme is absolutely damage, along with some self-damage and healing, and then if we have Dagur out there, we can get tons of boosts as well. One quick disclaimer that I wish I didn't have to make, but just so you know, there is a bug in the Double Down seasonal events in which, whenever your opponent plays a spying unit, rather than playing a unit from their own deck with the same provision cost, they will instead play a unit from your deck with the same provision cost, which is particularly significant because one of the highest provision cost spies, and one of the most common spies for opponents to play, is Heymaey Flaminica from Nilfgaard, and he costs 10 provisions, which means that if your opponent plays him, they will either play Melusine or Dagur out from your deck, and obviously those are two of the most important cards in this deck, which means this deck matches up very poorly against Nilfgaard specifically, at least if they're using Heymaey Flaminica. Now that being said, that is a bug, and it's a bug that messes with a lot of decks, so I'd hate to not play a deck just because you're concerned about your opponent cheesing the Heymaey strats, but just so you know, be particularly careful about that. And if you do match up against Nilfgaard, then maybe try to play your Dagurs and Melusines early before they play their Heymaey. But I think all the damage from this deck is going to make this a ton of fun to play, so let's go see it in action. Alright, so going against Northern Realms here, and they'll go first. Okay, and we have Fulmar, so let's save him for round 3 and try to combine him with Melusine and or Dagur, but we don't have either of them right now, so let's see if we can get them. Don't need 2 blue boys, because they are only 7 provision cost units. We'll automatically get the second one from our deck. There's Dire Bear, okay. Let's get rid of the Megascope. And that gets us Dagur. So that's good for round 3. We'll start with Donamir. And get Dandelion. Okay, so they're doing some deck boosting, it seems. Makes you wonder if maybe Erland and or Archgriffin? In which case, I think let's save Dire Bear, because that might be important later on. If they do play Erland, then let's make sure we play Dire Bear in the row that Erland is played in. But for now, let's start with the Greatsword. And get our other Greatsword out there as well. Put them in the same row, because I am anticipating that we'll use the Flaminica in the same row to heal them all. Alright, then we'll use a Temerian Drummer, and so, tempting as it may seem, I think we still try to save our Dire Bear, although it would, of course, shut down the boosting from that Temerian Drummer. So let's go round 2 of Greatswords here. Now, they're loading up on those Centurion Royal Guards, and those will get boosted the more of them that they have. And doubling down on the Drummers as well. So now let's go with the Flaminica. Start healing these Greatswords, so we get the other one out of our deck, because it's our only other remaining 6 provision cost card. Now they're going with the Dun Banner, which, once it gets boosted, will summon the rest of them from their deck. And so here they come. But we can do something similar here, if we'd like to, with our Shield Maidens. Though I think we might prefer to go with the Melusine Cultist first, Give ourselves a little bit of time to get those orders going. Oh, but that being said, yeah, then we get one of the Shield Maidens out from our deck, and that is, of course, definitely suboptimal, because we could have gotten them all had we just played this and then used our leader ability to thin them out, because now this is more or less a dead card. Now we'll go with the Kirak Marine. It'll be interesting to see how much they can boost with it. We'll get to see if they have Devotion. They do, because that's a 4-point boost. No neutral cards in this deck from our opponent. So now let's use a leader ability charge. Break out the Shield Maidens. Like I was saying, we would have gotten them all out if we had just played this one and used our leader ability on that. But I was hoping we were going to get another Cultist, so we could load up a little bit more on the damage before we did that. So now let's go Blueboy instead. Alright, now they're using Amphibious Assault. That'll give them a big boost for whatever this card is. And it's Margarita. And they should lock this unit that I intended to use our order ability on our previous turn, but alas, I was not quite quick enough, although they actually opt to lock Blueboy instead. And so we might even want to pass here. Of course means we would take the round 1 loss, but we'd have one more card than our opponent, so they would presumably dry pass in round 2. So we don't want this round to go all that long, because the longer it does go, the more letting them deck boost with Dandelion, and that's not ideal. So I think we do pass here. Which of course means they'll take the round 1 win. Alright, so we got another big card with Wild Boar of the Sea, so I like that. Let's definitely get rid of our Shield Maiden, though, now that this is more or less useless, since we've gotten rid of the other ones. And we don't need our second Wild Boar of the Sea, because this is our only 11 provision cost unit, so we were automatically guaranteed to play the second one out of our deck. We get Restore. It's not great unless and until we get Melusine. Okay, they are playing here. Going with Visigoda of Corvo. Okay, so that's a huge booster, of course. Gonna use Princess Pavetta as well, which I imagine they're gonna do to get back their Dun Banners. Yeah, that's exactly what they do. So it's tempting, once again, go with Dire Bear, because it is a great counter to Visigoda of Corvo, but it's also something that I feel like we might want to save for round 3. So are we willing to commit it here or not? I think we may need to prioritize protecting against the bleed attempt, because otherwise this Visigoda is going to be a huge problem, and they're going to be able to outpace us in this round, unless we commit everything in round 2, which is of course not ideal. So I think we do break out the Dire Bears then. And we'll put them in both rows here. And we know they got rid of their primary source of lock, so that means they may not have a way to shut them down. They're going to keep on playing, though, and Griffin Witcher looks like it is one of those cards that got a lot of those boosts, which is, in some ways, encouraging, because that suggests that at least they weren't all going towards something like an Archgriffin, though I suppose if they don't play the Archgriffin in round 2, then it's not all that useful to them. So now let's go with the Hermit. And we'll get a Savage Bear from our deck, which we can use to dish out some damage to either Visigoda or a Griffin Witcher. I think it might actually be easier to get rid of Visigoda. Despite it being boosted right now, it cannot boost itself. Now they'll pass. That does mean we need to play one more card here to catch up. But even with that being said, we'll be on even cards for round 3, so that's fine. I think we'd probably go for our Hermit in that case. And get another Savage Bear out here. And that'll be more than enough. So we'll take the round 2 win in that case. Okay, and this is big. We drew into Melusine, so that means we can play Melusine and Dagger, and these are our 2 10 provision cost cards, so when we play one of them, we'll get the other one out of our deck. So that's big. Combine that with Wild Boar of the Sea to boost Dagger, and that's great, especially because I think, given all those Dun Banners, their strategy for round 3 may be to flood their rows with a bunch of Dun Banners, combined with maybe something like King Foltest. So Wild Boar of the Sea is great against that. Let's get rid of one of our Bear Witcher Mentors. Royal Decree, I think, is better, because if we want to, we can get a Bear Witcher Mentor. Alright, so let's ease into things a little bit here. Going with the Melusine Cultist first. And, well, unfortunately, we do get the Bear Witcher Mentor out from our deck, which is, of course, not going to help us in this situation with no damage units out there. And it's the Kirak Marine for them. Also starting small here. Okay, and now let's break out Melusine, and when we play her, we'll either get our other dagger or our other Melusine out from our deck. And it's our other Melusine. So let's make a Melusine sandwich here. Alright, now here is King Foltest, as expected. And another King Foltest, so yeah, I'm expecting for them to try to print out as many dun banners as possible. So I think that's coming up next. But as I was saying, I think that's great for Wild Boar of the Sea, because that just means setting us up for tons and tons of damage to boost Dagger. So now let's use Royal Decree to get out Vildkaarl and put it on either side of Melusine here to give us even more cultists. Help power up those Melusines. Alright, now they're going to use Dandelion for more deck boosting. And here is the Archgriffin. So yeah, I was expecting for that to be something they were trying to boost early, but it looks like they chose to boost other targets instead. And in round 3, the Archgriffin is not really relevant. They used all their leader ability charges here as well. So I'm somewhat surprised they haven't tried to play any dun banners at this stage, because that means they're creating copies of these other bronze units that they probably don't care as much about. So now we go with Fulmar. And that'll give us Tears of Siren, and I'm thinking this melee row now is where we prefer to focus on our damage. Now Fulmar round 2, let's put over here. And I think we probably do try to make this one with the most rain on it, but then again, we can also increase the rain duration with our Melusines. Alright, now they're using Voimir, and again, I think the plan was for them to load up on those dun banners and use Voimir to boost all of them in the process, but they may not have a way to get them. Alright, so now we're about to break out the big damage as soon as we convert the Rain into Skellige Storm using Fulmar. So this is a good time for us to play our daggers. But before we convert that into Storm, let's increase the duration a little bit further. Now convert it. And now, our Vildkaarls will transform into Champions of Svalbard. Here's Voimir once again, but no great targets for them. And Estrella will give them some more boosting. Alright, and we would love for them to have more damage units, but they have enough boosting that they have actually gotten most of their units boosted here. I think we still do go for the Bear Witcher Mentor now, though. Let's play him. That'll give us a Melusine Cultist, which, why don't we put here? Because Fulmar is not going to last much longer. Oh, and I forgot to use Melusine's ability. Well, then again, we actually don't want to change this Storm over to Rain. Okay, now Griffin Witcher, Centurion Royal Guard. That doesn't change too much here, I don't think. This will also immediately lock itself and deal 3 damage. So I think now what we're looking to do is use the last of our leader ability charges to damage this Melusine as much as possible, because it is our most damaged unit right now. Remember, we've been increasing its base power every time we use its order ability, so right now it has 16 base power. So if we use our last charge here, that'll spawn in our Bear Abomination, and then we can use Restore to significantly boost that Melusine. Again, I think we actually don't want to use our Rain abilities here, because we want to keep these as Skellige Storm, and we already have enough duration here that they're going to be lasting for the rest of the game. Alright, then it's Erland. So this was the card that I was saying we might have potentially wanted to save our Dire Bears, because it takes a turn for them to play them before they can actually activate that order ability. So Dire Bear could have shut it down, but it felt like we needed that in round 2. But now, of course, it's time for our finisher, the Wild Boar of the Sea. So let's go for that. And that should take out several other cards here. Wild Boar of the Sea round 2. And in fact, they just forfeit, because that Storm was going to take out at least one of their Erlands, so we'll take the win. Alright, so going against monsters here, and they'll go first. Okay, and we have a ton of Melusine Cultists, and a few Hermits, but lots of small cards along with the Savage Bear. We do have Melusine, along with the Vildkaarl, and even the Cultists can be good to pair along with Melusine. But let's get rid of one of these Cultists. And, well, I'm not the biggest fan of these Megascopes unless we want to create a bazillion copies of these Savage Bears. Try to make them as strong as possible, but I'm not sure that's really the answer here. Alright, they'll start with a Witch Apprentice. They get a Barghest out from their deck. Don't think that's what they wanted, because they're going to need to consume that now. Let's start with a Shield Maiden. Okay, Bear Witcher Mentor out from our deck is not ideal. We have a lot of units at 5 provisions, so that is the one that is least certain as to what we're going to get out of our deck when we do that. But that's one of the reasons for playing the Shield Maiden, because if we use one round of our leader ability on her, we can get all the other ones out of our deck, giving us a lot of thinning, giving us more certainty when we play a 5 provision cost card as to what we're going to get from our deck. Alright, now they're going to go with the Beast. And interestingly, okay, going with the Runewright pair, it seems. Now let's go with the Savage Bear. Get a Hermit out here, and that could have been another way to set up the Shield Maidens. Of course, we did have Hermits already in our hand. So let's apply the Bleed. And that may be an invitation for them to consume this guy with their Barghest, but it's not the end of the world, because that'll make it harder for them to pull off their Dulla plus Runewright combo. Alright, now they're going with the Kikimor Worker. And get another one out from their deck. And they'll consume that. Tell you what, they look like they are a very boost-heavy deck. Let's go with our Oneiromancy here. Let's get out our Dire Bears. We'll put one in this row. And one in this row. So they now cannot get boosted at all. And this is technically healing, not boosting, so the Hermit's still able to get back up to 7 power. Alright, they're going to try to get rid of those Dire Bears, it seems, although by damaging them, they're actually helping us out. That means that now we can get boosted, but they still cannot. They're going to try to get boosted with the Beast, but it won't work, and Brewess doesn't get boosted even if she tries to consume. So in this case, I think we go with another Hermit next to our other Hermit. We can get a chain of Hermit healing, which will continue here, it seems. Now they're going with another Kikimor Worker, which does have the base power to help them out, even if they can't do that boosting. Now I'd like to save some of our big cards, of course, like Melusine, like the Melusine Cultists, at least because they go along with Melusine fairly well, and maybe even one of our Hermits, certainly Vildkaarl as well. So let's go with the Megascope here. This might be the last card we want to play in this round. And we'll use it to create another Hermit. Alright, now they're going to go with another Kikimor Worker. In which case, to finish this off, I'd say let's go with a Melusine Cultist. And get another Melusine Cultist out here as well. And we may not have time for these order abilities to go to use here, but we'll see. Alright, now they're going with the Slizzards. They're still playing. But they don't want to be consuming here, because they can't get boosted. So we are putting them in a tough spot, in which case, alright, let's add to the Hermit chain. This time, let's make sure we have a unit on the other side of this Melusine Cultist, so that way it can get boosted. And then the Savage Bear. Let's apply the Bleeding. Shouldn't matter too much who we apply to at this stage, because no matter what, people are not going to get boosted. And let's activate these orders. That way we'll start boosting people on either side, and dishing out a little bit of extra damage. They'll pass, which will give us the round 1 win here on even cards. Okay, so we still have Melusine, and we still have the Vildkaarl, which I'd like to play next to her, and maybe have the Melusine Cultist on the other side. Then round 2 of Oneiromancy, and actually the best way to use Oneiromancy in this event is to go Oneiromancy into Oneiromancy to get 2 echoed copies, but I forgot to do that. Heymaey Flaminica is particularly good in the same row as Melusine, or with the other 6 provision cost unit that we have in our deck, the Greatsword, because that'll get damaged, and therefore healing, particularly useful. Royal Decree, also great here. This is looking solid. I'm thinking we keep it at this, and we might dry pass here to give ourselves guaranteed card advantage and double last say in round 3. They'll go with the Wild Hunt Rider, and that's a decent play, because of course they know they have dominance here. So that gives them all their Wild Hunt Riders out of their deck. Okay, we drew into some pretty big cards, because we got Melusine number 2, which, if she was our only 10 provision cost card, would actually be a bad thing, because we were already guaranteed to get her out of our deck when we played the first Melusine. However, we do have another 10 provision cost card. It's Dagur. So we play one of these Melusines, we'll get Dagur out of our deck. Play the other Melusine, we'll get the other Dagur out of our deck, so that's still great. I think we're going to want to use either Oneiromancy or Royal Decree to get Fulmar, and then we have Wild Boar the Sea is awesome for the damage to set up Dagur, and on Craite plus Flaminica, also great, so let's stick with this. Alright, they're going to start with the Cave Troll, and it's in the melee row. We'll double down on it. Okay, I was going to say, the melee row Cave Troll makes me think possibly even something like Keltullus. The fact that they have a second one in the range row, not so sure anymore. But fortunately, even if they do use Keltullus, we're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 really big units here. The Melusines and the Dagurs. So if everything else gets destroyed, it's probably okay. Let's lead off with Melusine, though. And that'll get us one of our Dagurs. Alright, now they're going to use Brewess. And, okay. Weavis as well. They've got the boosting, they've got the consumption. But nothing to immediately shut down our setup here, so that's a good sign. Now, before we activate Melusine here, let's go with Melusine number 2, and therefore Dagur number 2. Then I'd like to get Fulmar down there on our next turn before we start activating these. So I'd like to get a long rain duration out there before we use Fulmar to convert that rain into Storm. Alright, but here comes the damage with Wispess, and yeah, you know, with all the Crones, it certainly looked like that was going to be possible, so that does hurt, but we do still have one of our Melusines, so that's good. And yes, with their damage they're starting to pull out here, we're definitely going to want to try to get our boosting started here. So now let's use Royal Decree to get Fulmar. And give us some Tears of Siren to get some of that rain going. And our second Fulmar. Give us some more Tears of Siren for some more rain. Then we'll use Melusine to increase the duration of that rain. And take your pick where we'd like that to be. I'm thinking maybe the melee row. That'll start to get our cards boosted here, so it should be more difficult for them to destroy stuff, but not impossible yet, because they played enough Crones that if they have another Wispess, they'll have a ton of damage on her. And that is exactly what it is here, so what will they choose to destroy? It's Melusine. And an Apiarian Phantom as well. So that means we're relying on Dagur here to get the job done. So let's see what we can do in that case. Let's use the Melusine Cultist to increase the duration of the rain before we convert it to Storm with Fulmar. And we get a Bear Witch or Mentor out from our deck. And we do have some damaged units on our side, so it does get boosted a bit, but that's still earlier than we would like to be playing this from our deck. Alright, now it's another Apiarian Phantom. And they'll get a Beast out, and it's definitely not the strongest unit out there, so that will get boosted as well. And they destroy one of our Fulmars with one of those Apiarian Phantoms, so that does hurt. We do still have one of them to convert one of these sets of Rain into Storm. So let's activate that Rain, and I think the range row is now perhaps even a better option. And convert it. And now let's go with the Heymaey Flaminica in this range row. And we'll get the other one out from our deck, so we're going to have a lot of healing going on here. At the moment, it's just to get Fulmar. But we can play our Greatsword down there on our next turn to get that healed up as well. Alright, now it's Igni. And our melee row is looking like a strong target for that, because that'll get rid of both daggers, so that does hurt. Second round, in fact, our range row also has units tied for the highest amount, but it was not the first card they played, so the initiative is not active, and we just barely missed the 35 power mark, so we avoided losing this Bear Witcher Mentor and Fulmar. So with no Melusine and no daggers, this is looking increasingly difficult here. But let's see if we can still get the job done by going with the Craite Greatswords in this range row. So we'll get another one out from our deck as well. And they'll get healed up by the Flaminica. Now they have Goliath for a big point slam. Oh, and really, Morn's Heart. Suppose they do have a lot of stuff in their graveyard. So that's an interesting one. That means that will get quite big. So now let's go Oneiromancy into another Greatsword. And we can squeeze one in here. And put the other in our melee row. So this one will not get healed by the Flaminicas. But we should have enough damage with Wild Boar with the C to get this back up to full 10 power. Alright, now it's Werecat. We have a ton of units in this row here, so I'm surprised they didn't opt to play that in the range row. Maybe they were taken aback by our healing. But okay, they're out of cards. So now we go Vildkaarl. And with that Vildkaarl, we'll get, well, another Vildkaarl. And what we're looking for here is to use our leader ability, transform these guys. However, unfortunately, I think we only have enough to convert one of them. So let's damage this Greatsword with our last round of our leader ability to get out this Bear Abomination. Because this guy can heal off that damage there as soon as we play Wild Boar the Sea. This is the key question. Will this be enough damage for us to retake the lead? We're about to find out. There's round one, and it's awfully close. Round two is enough to do the trick. So no Melusine, no dagger, and it's still enough for us to take the win. So there's a look at a crazy high damage Skellige deck for the new Double Down seasonal events. If you liked the video, then make sure to hit the like and subscribe button and leave a comment down below. Let me know which other cards, archetypes, and factions you'd like us to experiment with next. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.